When that alarm goes off, start your day with us, CBS Mornings.
I'll see you in the morning.
Tonight, could rising concerns over bird flu affect the price of eggs? Then, air travel disruptions after tornadoes and high winds hit the Midwest, and how towns in the path of the eclipse are cashing in on the phenomenon on the CBS Evening News.
To for the world's central kitchen strike, Mr. President.
It felt like it was the right thing to do. And when the president really didn't even mention Gaza or Palestine in his first initial comments to me, I felt that I needed to get out.
Once people start to focus in and they see their two choices, it's obvious that Joe will win this election.
Hello, I'm Ed O'Keefe, CBS News in Washington. Welcome to America Decides. President Biden and Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu will speak tomorrow in the wake of the Israeli airstrike that killed 7 aid workers with World Central Kitchen in Gaza. The president is facing fresh criticism for his support for Israel in the aftermath of the deadly attack. A meeting held Tuesday with Arab and Muslim leaders and activists was meant to be private and originally an iftar dinner to break the Ramadan fast. But participants told the White House they didn't feel comfortable having such a meal while Gaza is on the brink of famine. And at least one participant showed up and ended up walking out. Dr. Thayer Ahmad, an emergency physician from Chicago who traveled to Gaza earlier this year, says he delivered a note to the president from an 8-year-old orphan, then left the meeting. We'll hear more from the doctor in a moment, but here's what White House Press Secretary Karine Jean-Pierre had to say about all of this earlier today.
And so we understand how this community is feeling. It is a deeply painful moment for many in the Arab and Muslim communities. The president also expressed his commitment to continue working to secure an immediate ceasefire as part of a deal to free the hostages and significantly increase humanitarian aid.
CBS News chief foreign affairs correspondent and moderator of Face the Nation, Margaret Brennan, spoke with Dr. Ahmad earlier today and has more. Margaret, good to see you.
Good to be with you, Ed. And, you know, the White House has recently changed their rhetoric to try to express more empathy for the loss of so many civilians in Gaza and admitted they made a mistake not doing so earlier on, a mistake that you see playing out in this public manner with the anger that was displayed with this doctor. Dr. Ahmed is an ER physician in the south side of Chicago. He says he's used to stab wounds. He's used to bullet wounds. He was not at all prepared for what he saw when he went to volunteer in Gaza back in January. He intends to go back. He worked at a hospital there. He said the majority of those he treated were women and children, many of whom died from shrapnel, and the children often just from the impact of a blast, from a bomb falling and their home exploding. He did walk out from that meeting, and I asked him why he went in the first place. Take a listen.
President Biden walks in, says very few words, says something to the effect of, we know you guys have been working hard. This is going to be a listening session. We know a little bit about what's taking place. And then he pointed at me and asked me to start. And that's when I just kind of communicated that message about Rafah, about the concerns that I had having been in Khan Yunis and watching the hospital that I was in fall under siege and become defunct, and all of the massive amount of people that migrated to Rafah and were sheltering there now. And that there's no way, there's no alternative. There is no safe way to do this. It would be an absolute massacre if there's an invasion into Rafah.
Why walk out of that meeting with the president? Why not make your case and sit in front of him if, as you say, he has not heard from eyewitnesses before? I
wasn't sure that I was going to walk out of this meeting unless it felt like it was the right thing to do. And when the president really didn't even mention Gaza or Palestine in his first initial comments to me, I felt that I needed to get out, and I needed to at least express the hurt and the pain that the entire Palestinian American community is feeling.
So, Ed, this was an attempt to try to change policy, but really to get the U.S. to put some pressure on the Israeli military and Israeli government not to go in, as you heard, in a forceful way with a ground assault into Rafah, but to adopt this more direct and targeted approach to take out Hamas in the south. But as you heard there, a lot of frustration. The vice president, who was also in that meeting, has talked to members of the community and held listening sessions remotely sometimes in the past. The president was there for the first time. As you well know, there was a political cost. Aside from the very real death toll and pain, the political cost they are seeing at the ballot box. And we talked about that and whether that would matter to the doctor himself. Take a listen. Will you go and will you vote? And will you be able on an issue of conscience for yourself? Will that affect how you end up at the ballot box and which lever you pull?
Yeah, I mean, Margaret, to be honest with you, it's affecting how I feel about the next couple of days. I mean, it's changed everything with respect to our lives. Palestinian Americans will tell you our lives are upside down. We don't even know what we're going to do for the celebration for the end of month of Ramadan. We don't know what next week is going to look like. We're all worried about what's happening in Gaza. And
because you know people?
Yeah, we know people, absolutely. And, you know, there has been intense following of this, of what's going on. We know the intimate details of people who are suffering in Gaza. We know their names. We know the family members that have been lost. We know about the kids that haven't been in school for 6 months. And so for us, it affects everything in our lives. And it's going to affect how we vote. It's going to affect how we feel about the political engagement in this country.
And just to put a fine point on that, Ed, it's not just in this country. Social media has changed how people are experiencing this war, and that is a problem for U.S. allies around Israel as well, who see a rising amount of anti-American sentiment because of the U.S. military support for what is happening.
Right, and we heard so much of that despair and hopelessness in the lead-up to the Michigan primary, for example, and around Dearborn. We've heard it throughout this war.
Wisconsin.
And in Wisconsin recently, exactly. So to hear the doctor say it again, it's consistent with all the concern that so many Palestinian Americans, Arab Americans, Muslim Americans have. Well, we have you. There was some news out of Israel today regarding the Netanyahu government. Benny Gantz, who's one of the members of that cabinet that's holding the Israeli government together, now suggesting there should be early elections in September. What does that do to the coalition government? Does it mean the end is near for Netanyahu?
Well, it's certainly not a vote of confidence in the prime minister's choices from someone who is esteemed within Israel. Benny Gantz is more of a centrist. Netanyahu has put together the most right-wing coalition in Israel's history. He's also its longest-serving prime minister. Yeah. He is a survivor politically. Benny Gantz doing this in public. Chuck Schumer, the Democratic leader, came out saying this is something basically that he also was calling for. This would move elections from 2026, when they're scheduled, up to September. There are already large-scale protests against the Netanyahu government. And in fact, there were before October 7th because of some of the policy choices he was making to change his own judicial system. He's under investigation for corruption and because of some of the right-wing policies. But to answer your question, even if Gantz quit tomorrow, it wouldn't collapse the government. He's part of this 5-person cabinet put together for the war.
Right.
It is the coalition in this parliamentary system. If Netanyahu were to lose some of those right-wing members, Ben-Gvir, Smotrich, the guys you hear Joe Biden tick off by name and say he doesn't like what they are doing, that might cause a problem. And some of the U.S. officials worry that there is an incentive for the war to be extended in order for the political career of Benjamin Netanyahu to survive. Senator Chris Van Hollen said as much on Face the Nation recently.
Yeah, so more to come on that. In the meantime, regarding the attack on World Central Kitchen workers, Chef Jose Andres speaking out today to our colleagues at Reuters, now raising doubts that it was an unintentional attack. Let's take a listen to part of what he had to say to Reuters.
Humanitarians and civilians should never be paying the consequences of war. This is a basic principle of humanity. At the time, this looks like it's not a war against terrorism anymore. Seems this is a war against humanity itself. You cannot be destroying every building. You cannot be destroying every hospital, every school. You cannot be targeting humanitarian. You cannot be targeting children. You cannot be fighting the basis of what humanity should be standing for.
And in an op-ed for the New York Times, Andres wrote, Israel is better than the way this war is being waged. It is better than blocking food and medicine to civilians. It is better than killing aid workers who had coordinated their movements with the Israel Defense Forces. In the remaining moments we have, what does this do to ongoing humanitarian relief work or the attempts to get humanitarian relief into Gaza?
It's going to have a chilling effect, period. The 7 lives that were lost here, many of them were European. One of them was American. And this is an organization run by a celebrity. That's why we're talking about it today, Ed. But nearly 200 humanitarian aid workers working for the UN have been killed since October. 97 journalists have been killed, according to Committee to Protect journalists. We don't know all their names, but what we do know from U.S. officials like David Satterfield, the envoy that President Biden appointed, is that this targeting of UN convoys and sometimes the police escorting them has been an issue. Those police work for the government. Since 2007, the government's been Hamas. And so Israel's definition of what can be a legitimate target or not may not match with the United States. The bottom line is the distribution's the biggest problem. And right now, having someone inside to distribute it, there's no clear answer on who can do it. That's why these airdrops and these desperate measures are being adopted. The other alternative would be to use the existing infrastructure, and that is the UN. And the United States Congress just defunded it.
Right. And it's going to make the attempts to build that temporary barge and get relief in starting in May even that more difficult.
Right. You get it to the shore, who distributes it?
Right, exactly. Great to have your perspective, and thank you for talking to the doctor and bringing it to us.
Thanks, Ed.
Margaret Brennan. Thank you. And of course, you can see Margaret on Face the Nation this Sunday right here on CBS News. Lawyers for Texas and the Biden administration squared off during a court hearing about the state's controversial immigration law. We'll hear what each side had to say. You're streaming America Decides.
Mr. President, there's a lot to talk about.
A lot to talk about.
If China invades Taiwan, what will the U.S. Navy do?
Here in Tel Aviv, second siren in about 10 minutes.
This Humvee just pulled up and said, it's time to leave.
The CBS Evening News with Nora O'Donnell.
I had progressively fallen deeper into the world of online sports betting.
The risk is the rush.
What do you think is driving the spike in popularity?
I think it's legality.
If it's legal, I'm going to use it. There are ways to bet when you are 18.
We've created an epidemic of child gambling.
You can't walk into a male dormitory in a college campus without sports betting happening.
It's America's most neglected problem.
I used sports betting as a way to escape, when in reality, I'm choosing self-destruction. Whatever I had left, it was gone.
The purpose of the industry is to get you to play to extinction. And that means until all your money is gone.
Stories start with the who, what, when, and where. But it's why it's important to you that matters most. Knowing what to ask is how you open the door to a deeper understanding. See you on Prime Time, streaming free everywhere.
An original documentary from CBS Reports.
That desired farm is a wonderful place to raise children, and it still is.
Promises broken.
Black Americans have been the target of racism and discrimination pretty much from the time they acquired ownership in the land.
Costing black farmers hundreds of billions in generational wealth.
They did everything to make sure we were run off that land.
But communities are uniting to continue the fight.
Collective ownership is powerful.
To keep their land and their dreams alive.
To watch my children play on land that we own means everything.
So land is power.
Most definitely.
40 Acres and a Mule, now streaming on the free CBS News app.
An original documentary from CBS Reports. Tensions rising between a powerful country and a vital island.
The supply of this technology came grinding to a halt. The world would grind to a halt.
Absolutely.
As Taiwan faces threats and aggression.
Taiwan is on the front line, and we understand our responsibility as a democracy. We cannot fall.
CBS News examines whether they can defend themselves.
Putin, Ukraine, China, Taiwan, there are manifestations of the battle between autocracy and democracy. And that is a fight that we're all engaged in.
Defending Taiwan, now streaming on the free CBS News app.
When weather turns extreme.
Record-breaking storm surge and devastating wind.
Every second counts.
The mud punched a hole right through the wall.
See, hear, feel the forecast. Tonight on the CBS Evening News with Nora O'Donnell.
Federal appeals court heard arguments today about Texas's new immigration law. The measure would allow the state to arrest and jail migrants suspected of entering the U.S. illegally. The Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals, based in New Orleans, is set to decide whether the Texas law is constitutional and is blocking the Lone Star State from enforcing the new law ahead of its ruling. Camilo Montoya Galvez, who tracks immigration for CBS News, unlike anyone else at this network, is here with me at the desk. You were monitoring this case today. How did the arguments go?
Well, the Biden administration was in federal court today to argue that SB4 is not only unconstitutional, but that it challenges the federal government's longstanding power to set immigration rules, including as to who gets to stay in the U.S. and who does not. Texas is arguing that this is an effort by the state to help the federal government deal with the unprecedented migration crisis along the U.S.-Mexico border. Let's take a listen to what the Solicitor General in Texas said.
Now, to be fair, maybe Texas went too far, and that's the question this court's going to have to decide. But that's the context of which we are here. Texas has looked at the Supreme Court precedent and the laws that Congress has enacted and has tried to develop a law that goes up to the edge, but no further.
As you just heard, Ed, the Texas lawyer said that this law may well have gone too far. And that is certainly what the Biden administration has argued in court. They believe, the administration does, that this is an unconstitutional effort by the state to basically commandeer a federal policymaking area, immigration, and that Texas does not have the authority to essentially deport people back to Mexico and also to arrest migrants for what are essentially federal crimes. But again, Texas is saying that it does have that authority, that this is an effort to help the Biden administration. And we should also underscore that the hearing highlighted how much confusion and uncertainty there is about how Texas would even implement this operationally, especially that provision that allows state judges to issue what are de facto deportation orders. Let's take a listen to that exchange.
Texas takes the person to the port of entry. As a legal and as a practical matter at the port of entry, the United States is there. So if the person says, you know what, I have a pending asylum claim, well, the United States will not going to send you to Mexico at that point. And we've also heard that Mexico might not very well take the person.
Texas here is conceding that it cannot physically remove people to a foreign sovereign country, and that it needs the consent of both the federal government and Mexico to do that. And as you know, the Department of Homeland Security and Mexico have both said that they will not cooperate with Texas on this effort.
I just think the fact that the Solicitor General says maybe Texas went too far, for you guys to decide,
that's right,
is very different than what Governor Abbott has been suggesting. That in fact, we're going to try to do it better. They seem to realize an adverse ruling is coming. While we have you, well, first of all, do we have any sense of what the judges make of the arguments today?
Well, the two sides face pointed questions. The Justice Department was grilled on its arguments, and Texas was also asked what it hoped to accomplish with this law if it cannot effectively send people back to Mexico. But it is important to underscore that two of these three judges on this panel have already suggested that the Biden administration is likely to prevail on the merits of this case. So they could receive a favorable decision in the coming weeks. But I think ultimately this will be decided by the Supreme Court, and that ruling by the High Court will have wide-ranging implications on the question of who gets to set immigration policy in this country.
And in our remaining time, I know a lot of questions we get on the White House beat is, when is the president still thinking about taking some kind of executive action on immigration, given the likely uptick in illegal border crossings coming this spring?
Well, the simple answer is that yes, he is still considering these actions, according to people familiar with these internal deliberations inside the administration. This would involve the president invoking the sweeping presidential power that allows president to suspend the entry of migrants when it is determined that their entry could be detrimental to U.S. interests. It would allow him to restrict asylum if a number of people crossing the border increases to a certain level. He has not taken that action yet, and I believe that is because a springtime influx in migration has not materialized yet, Ed. But if the number of people crossing the border does increase indeed in the future, he could very well do that.
May not have a choice, and the politics of it will get really messy. All right, Camila Montoya Galvez, who tracks immigration for us. Good to see you.
Thanks,
Thank you. A new poll finds former President Donald Trump leading President Biden in several key battleground states. We'll break down the numbers with our panel. Stay with us. You're streaming America Decides.
On our places, right shiny faces.
When you wake up in the morning, we want to be your go-to team.
Nate has one of the quickest minds I've ever seen.
Tony has a way of making people feel comfortable.
Gailey has this unbelievable knack to ask the question that you're asking at home.
I've been told I could talk to a tree, and that's pretty much true.
I don't go to work in the morning. I go for coffee with my two good friends, and we talk about the world.
Your morning routine just got better. CBS Mornings, weekdays at 7.
It didn't seem like anything could happen, because nothing ever happens in East Palestine, but it did.
Authorities released toxic fumes from 5 derailed train cars.
Resident, please evacuate. Acute bronchitis due to chemical fumes.
Did you ever have these problems before the derailment?
No, ma'am.
This neighborhood's not safe no more.
We can assure the community that there's not vinyl chloride entering their communities.
Then why are there so many people feeling these various symptoms of bloody noses or difficulty breathing or bronchitis?
That's a hard question to answer.
We're talking about one of the most blatant releases of a mixture of some of the most toxic chemicals that we've seen in America.
I feel like now I have a duty to warn other communities. If my daughter has to watch me die of cancer, at least it saves someone else. This case.
It's like a screenplay, something straight out of Hollywood.
But it's not fiction. It's 48 hours.
Human remains found this week.
4 families shattered.
There's no physical evidence.
The mystery would haunt investigators for years.
There's some questions that have to be asked and need to be answered.
Like a John Grisham novel.
A gripping true crime original. 48 hours. Now streaming on the free CBS News app.
This is CBS.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to our Dragon capsule here in space.
Sightseers in space, the thrill of a lifetime.
Seeing the Earth from space, it was so exhilarating.
But the risks that come with the territory.
There have been 4 fatal accidents. That's a 1% fatal accident rate.
Might make you look before you launch.
If you had 1 out of 100 airplanes falling out of the sky, we'd have a public crisis.
Space tourism, now streaming on the free CBS News app.
So it's not a part of you that's a little worried because you seem to be off kilter a little bit.
I feel that Joe will be reelected.
But when these polls, like the Wall Street Journal one, land in the White House and he's losing in all the battleground states.
No, he's not losing in all the battleground states. He's coming up and he's even or doing better. So you know what? Once people start to focus in and they see their 2 choices, it's obvious that Joe will win this election.
Welcome back to America Decides. That was First Lady and Chief Biden campaign strategist Jill Biden on CBS Mornings today. The poll she's referencing, or that Tony DeCopel was referencing, is one from the Wall Street Journal that has President Biden trailing former President Donald Trump in 6 out of the 7 swing states, as you can see there. Wisconsin is the only one where the president is at least tied, as the polling suggests. Let's bring in our panel, Robert Costa and Jessica Taylor. Robert, of course, CBS News chief election and campaign correspondent. Jessica is the Senate and Governor's editor for the Cook Political Report. Good to see both of you. These surveys, Bob, just the latest example of how TikTok tight it is. And the Biden campaign has a point. There are some out there that suggest they're ahead ever so slightly in places like Pennsylvania or Wisconsin, depending on which surveys you look at. But either way, former President Trump still has a big advantage here.
He does and he doesn't. It's so early, I would argue, as a reporter at this stage in the cycle to start saying that someone's way ahead or behind in any of these battleground states. So much of this election, to me, is about motivation of core constituencies within each respective party. If President Biden is able to get labor to come out in Michigan and Wisconsin and Pennsylvania and get women and others who support abortion rights to come out in record numbers in some of these key states, then the polling right now won't likely be reflective of what happens on Election Day.
And to that point about motivating the base, we once again, in his appearances in Michigan and Wisconsin yesterday, heard him use the word bloodbath to describe, in this case, crime committed by immigrants, but picking up on something that had been criticized by members of both parties when he used it about 2-3 weeks ago. Why keep doing that?
In 1968, Richard Nixon was famous for running a law and order campaign, casting the country as one full of disorder, that they needed Nixon to come in, stabilize the country. Trump's arguing that the country now, and using his own rhetoric, is akin to a third world country, a country with total disorder at its own borders. And he's arguing that he alone, using his own rhetoric, as we've heard from the past, he alone can fix it. And he is saying that Biden is feeble, not able to lead the country in any commanding way. And for the Biden administration, it's going to be, they have to prepare the campaign too, for a constant barrage of this kind of political language from Trump, that if the trade policies aren't changed, there will be a, quote, bloodbath for the economy. And this is visceral rhetoric because Trump is appealing to people's visceral grievance on politics, culture, and social issues.
And it resonates down the ballot, Jessica, doesn't it?
It does, because, I mean, the Senate is also very much in play and is one that is incredibly, a map that's incredibly favorable for Republicans. You know, I think echoing Robert's point, I do think that it's a little, you know, there's time and voters aren't engaged. My boss, Amy Walter, likes to call this the Green Day election. Wake me up when September ends. Let's see what the polls say at the end of September. But, you know, very tight within the margin of error in a lot of these. But, you know, obviously very, you know, if general elections are about the incumbent, as they usually are, it's not a good place for President Biden to be.
For the kids who watch us here on the stream, Green Day is a very popular band from the 1990s. For our parents, too, who maybe don't know them. I hadn't heard that line before, but that works. Part of the reason we had you in today, Jessica, is because you track Senate contests, which, of course, are just as, if not arguably, sometimes more important than the presidential race, because it's going to help determine who really runs Washington. You guys have made a change in one of the key races for the Senate this year.
Yes, we moved Nevada Senate from our lean Democrat column to toss-up, so it joins 3 other states there. That's Montana Senate, John Tester, Ohio Senate, Sherrod Brown, who both represent states that Trump, won twice, in Montana by double digits, and then Arizona Senate, the open seat there left by retiring independent Senator Kyrsten Sinema. And, you know, we have 3 other races now in the lean Democrat column: Pennsylvania Senate, Michigan Senate, and Wisconsin Senate. You know, all of these overlap so much with the presidential battlegrounds. It's a little hard to differentiate, but in my conversations with both Republicans and Democrats, there's more of a trepidation about Nevada. Now, I think it's a little bit of a surprise in a way, because of those battleground states, Nevada is the only one that Democrats actually won both in 2016 and in 2020, but just by a little over 2 points. And the 2022 Senate race there was the closest in the country, decided by less than 8,000 votes. And this is also where Republicans ousted the only Democratic governor, Joe Lombardo, there beating. And so you have Jackie Rosen, that was elected, ousted Dean Heller in 2018.
Yep.
One of the unique things about Nevada is that its electorate turns over about a quarter.
I love that you included this. The state, every election cycle, a quarter of voters in Nevada are new. Which means incumbents have to go back every 6 years, 4 years, and literally introduce themselves to a whole new batch of voters.
Right. So, you know, we saw Catherine Cortez Masto start off with this sort of, you know, ground to make up. And she'd already been elected statewide even before she was elected for the Senate. She'd been a state attorney general. Jackie Rosen's had a really fast rise in politics. She was a synagogue president before she was elected to the House for one term and then to the Senate. So she's not as well known to voters. Republicans do have a primary there, but National Republicans have backed former Army Captain Sam Brown. Purple Heart recipient, has a really heroic story, was badly wounded when an IED blew up. He had suffered burns over 30% of his body. He ran in the primary against the then Republican sort of nationally endorsed candidate Adam Laxalt. He has sort of a new team around him this time. He has, you know, the Washington establishment, the NRSC, and things on his side.
Yeah.
But I think, you know, he does have to get through that primary. He doesn't have any serious challengers at this moment. We'll see if some of them put up money. And if that turns into a race, he has Lombardo backing him. But this really reflected, I think, more of the state of Nevada, where it has been uniquely affected by still the post-COVID economy, and then also immigration. To me, it's a lot of its makeup and the issues are pretty similar to what's happening in Arizona.
Yeah.
And, you know, when we look at the Biden numbers, too, this is a state where he's consistently trailed Donald Trump especially in comparison to some of those other swing states.
And the one thing, real quick, Bob, to you that is happening this time that hasn't happened so much in the past is there's a lot more coordination to some extent between those running for Senate and the Trump campaign. They're a little more simpatico, at least this time going into November.
A decade ago, when Trump started to look at a presidential run in 2016, around this time in 2014, he was a total outsider. A decade on, he is the party. And so many of these candidates are, if not imitating Trump's political style and his ideology, they're at least having echoes of it inform their campaign.
Yeah. Although Sam Brown, as you point out, is slightly different Republican in that he's moderated his views, or at least has a more moderate approach to things like abortion. So
yeah, he had a really groundbreaking interview with his wife talking about how she had an abortion. But again, Democrats still feel like they can use this issue against him because he has supported limitations and things in the past.
Yeah. I imagine there are Democrats saying to you today, Jessica, what took you so long is always a toss-up in Nevada. Yeah. Just a reason why we all have to go to Nevada for work. Yeah. Family and friends still don't believe that's what we have to go, but it is. Robert Costa and Jessica Taylor, great to see both of you. Thank you for being here. And that does it for today. We'll be back with another edition of America Decides tomorrow at 5 p.m. Eastern. Thank you for streaming CBS News.
Washington is the seat of power. National security, foreign policy, global economics, every story comes through Washington in some way. We bring some of the most powerful voices